Good afternoon. Welcome to our Advent lunch on this fourth day of Advent. It's so nice to have so many of you here. I think we'd like to start. Today is December 2nd, and at noon today at St. John's, the Mass remembers the 4 churchwomen from El Salvador who were martyred 35 years ago today. So I'd like to just ask us to take a minute of prayer and remember Sister Dorothy Cassell, Sister Maura Clark, Sister Jean Donovan, and Ida Ford. These are women who witnessed with their lives working for peace and justice in El Salvador. And they give us inspiration for Advent. Amy Hoover is our speaker for Advent, and she is a wonder. She is the director of the Creighton Retreat Center. She was named director in 2013, and she is also the resident spiritual director there. It says something about Amy's life journey and her own witness to following her heart that she has a master's degree in mathematics and is the director of a retreat center. She also has her master's in Christian spirituality from Creighton and had a lot of education as a spiritual director in Iowa. Amy's leadership, her sense of calm, her peacefulness, has really turned the retreat center into a wonderful place. She has seen, they've just opened a brand new dining room, an expanded dining room, and if you haven't been over there in a few years, it's really something wonderful. There's a lot more programming going on. There's a lot more energy there. And we are thrilled to have Amy as part of the Mission and Ministry Division. And Amy and her husband Charlie have been married for 30 years. They have 2 children. One lives in Panama, and Allie, and Kenny is in Des Moines. Pretty good for no notes at all. Please help me welcome Amy Hoover.
Good morning. It's still morning. In the middle of October, I got a call at the retreat center from Maureen. When I answered the phone, I was really glad to hear her voice. And then she said, "Father Andy is here with me." I should have known at that point that something was up and that maybe I should just say, "Have a good day, I'll talk to you later," and hang up the phone. It is not unusual for me to get a call from Maureen or Andy, but it is unusual for me to get a call from both together. Thankfully, it was a nice invitation. They had called to invite me to give this Advent reflection today. I was humbled by the invitation and was pausing to consider it when they said they had a topic for me. They wanted me to share something on Advent that speaks to the year of mercy proclaimed by Pope Francis that is about to begin. This made me hesitate even more. As I have shared not just a few times over the past couple weeks, I don't really consider mercy one of my go-to topics. And at first, I couldn't think how mercy and Advent related to one another. So I prayed about this invitation for a few days before waking up one morning with some ideas about what I might have to say. And I decided that this was a sign from God that, as with all of my reflections, I would not be writing alone and that there would be something to say. The title, the connection that came to me that morning, was what I am using today, Mercy, an Invitation of the Incarnation. But I would like to start with Advent. And I'm guessing most of us have a handle on the meaning of this season. We are celebrating, preparing for the coming of Jesus, the second coming of Christ. During this season, we try to find time to be present to God in the midst of chaos as we are busy buying presents and preparing for family gatherings and bringing the semester to a close. Common images and themes include the Advent wreath, light, being awake, waiting, patience. But what about mercy? What do you think of when I say we are going to observe a year of mercy? Anybody have anything pop into your head?
I think of hope.
Hope. Forgiveness. Anybody else? Awareness. In the back? Sister Faustina. Great. Thank you. I have to be honest. I thought of Blessed Mother Teresa, feeding the hungry, clothing the naked, visiting the imprisoned. I also thought of Sister Helen Prejean. I did not think of me and how I might engage in this year of mercy, how I might be called to these things as well. My thought was one of Pope Francis is talking about the Dorothy Days of the world, the folks over in the Schlegel Center for Service and Justice and their mission trips. He's not talking to me, but he is, of course. Pope Francis is inviting me, and he is inviting you to spend this year reflecting on and engaging in and receiving mercy. So what is mercy? Some definitions from Merriam-Webster include, mercy is compassionate behavior on the part of those in power. Mercy is kind or forgiving treatment of someone who could be treated harshly. Mercy is kindness or help given to people who are in a very bad or desperate situation. After reflecting on these, I came up with some thoughts of my own to ponder. Mercy is unearned, and it eases suffering. It is possible to do works of mercy and not be merciful. I think our brokenness makes it difficult to be merciful. We can clothe the naked, feed the hungry, visit the imprisoned without actually being merciful. We can do these things because someone tells us we should or because we think they would be good to do, but I wonder, can we truly be merciful, do the works, and have the attitude of love and compassion without Christ within us? I think not. I think it is the Christ within us that heals us and empowers us to be merciful. Christ is merciful through us. This brings us, to my mind, to the connection of mercy and Advent. We can be merciful only with Christ. The incarnation, God becoming flesh, is itself a call to conversion of heart. God joins with humanity to make mercy accessible to us. We can extend mercy to others, and we can receive mercy when it is extended to us only through Christ. This is an invitation of the incarnation. We, as the body of Christ, are called and invited to continue the incarnation, recognizing Christ within us and being Christ to others. So what does this look like? It certainly looks like Blessed Mother Teresa, Dorothy Day, Sister Helen Prejean. Some of us are called to those extraordinary ways of being in the world. But as I was praying and reflecting on mercy the past few weeks, the message I heard was something on a smaller scale. I heard an invitation to be merciful to those whose path I cross every day. With that in mind, I would like to share two stories from my own life. I share this first story because, as Jesus shows us in the story of the washing of the feet, that before we can love and or serve another, we have to be able to receive love and service from others, this mercy. In 2013, I was experiencing a time of what I have come to call homelessness. My husband Charlie and I had recently left our spiritual home to move to the retreat center. I was also struggling with God and wasn't sure how I was being called to be in relationship. In December of that year, I was in North Carolina getting ready to graduate from a program in small group dream leader training. I had journeyed the previous 2 years with a group of 11 people from across the United States and Australia, from a variety of different religious and cultural backgrounds. We had gathered 6 times in the past couple years and shared our stories and our nighttime dreams in an effort to know ourselves, our God, and our calls more deeply. This was our last time together. I was feeling the loss of another community very deeply. I was feeling homeless, physically and spiritually. As we gathered for the graduation, one of the instructors, Jerry, approached and asked how I was doing. I answered in a very surface way, shared about how things were going at the retreat center, and then he went on and greeted other graduates. A few minutes later, he returned and asked me again how I was doing. He had sensed that something deeper was going on with me. I told him about the loss I was feeling and wondering who God is and my sense of homelessness, but we really didn't have time to talk. But in that moment, he looked into my eyes with great love, with the love of Christ, and he said to me, "Remember, Christ is in the homelessness as well." For a brief moment, I knew the Christ in me was connecting to the Christ in him, and I was reminded that I am not alone. I am not homeless because Christ has a home in me. Jerry was allowing God to use him to ease my suffering in that moment. I was on the receiving end of God's mercy. It was, and still is, a great gift. My second story is more recent. I recently returned from my annual retreat, 8 days of silence, prayer, and rest. Well, that is what it was supposed to be. A couple days into the retreat, the heat in my accommodations quit working. I let the staff know, and they called the furnace man. He came out and assessed the situation, and soon the director of the retreat center and the furnace man were in my quarters discussing the problem. A different company was going to need to be called, and they probably would not respond quickly. Translation, I was going to be without heat for the rest of my retreat. I could have responded in many different ways, and in fact, having been on the other side of these conversations as the director of the retreat center, I have encountered many different responses. But I think partially because I was in that retreat and prayer mode, my response was simply, "Okay, it'll be fine." The serviceman and the director were quietly stunned. I think they were expecting a different, possibly more angry response, or maybe they were just hoping I would volunteer to go somewhere else. As I have continued to reflect on this encounter, I see how God was helping me to be merciful in that situation. The staff was doing what they could, but they didn't have any more control over the situation than I did. There was no reason to be angry with them. I wonder how I changed their day by ensuring them that I would be fine and things would work out. I share this example not as an example of how wonderful I am. Believe me, I have responded differently in similar situations. But to share an example that we can be merciful, and I believe are called to be merciful in the most mundane situations of our day. I also believe that we are only capable of this because of Christ's presence within us. Both of these stories also point to the core of what I believe it means to be merciful. At the core, I believe He that is mercy calls us to look beyond the externals of the world, look behind the personas of each person, look underneath the color of a person's skin, their position in life, their religion, their clothes, and see each individual for whom God created them to be, to recognize their dignity. To be merciful is simply to look from the place of Christ within us and see the Christ within each person that crosses our path each day. For me, the most striking example of this is Sister Helen Prejean. I only recently saw the movie Dead Man Walking. I resisted it for years. I'm not totally sure why. But God has been working in me, and I was deeply moved by this movie and how Sister Helen was able to almost peel away the externals and see, talk, and relate to Matthew Poncelet as Christ would see him. This is what we are called to do. It is what Jesus did in his encounter with the woman caught in adultery, and Jesus saw beyond and behind her sin. I think mercy is expressed through the eyes. Can we imagine what it would be like to have been the woman caught in adultery and experience the mercy of Jesus as he looks at us? It was through the eyes of my friend Jerry that I experienced a relief of my suffering. Truly, I believe it was the eyes of Christ. Take a moment to look into the eyes of Jesus here. What do you see? What do you feel? I mentioned earlier that as I was praying about the invitation to share some thoughts with you today, that God placed some thoughts and ideas in my mind. And I have shared several of these already, but I want to share one more story from that morning. Before I went on retreat, I heard about one of my high school teachers who had been arrested on charges associated with child pornography. I was truly saddened by this. I thought he was a good teacher, a good advisor, and a good coach. The morning I spoke about earlier, when I woke up with thoughts of what I could share, I found that I woke up praying for him. This surprised me a little. I then realized that, as a coincidence would have it, I would be going on retreat soon, and the place I had decided to go was in my hometown. I began to hear the nudge that maybe I was supposed to go see him. Now, I realize many of you don't know me, so I will stop here and tell you that this is way outside my box. I don't think I know anyone who has been to prison, let alone ever considered visiting. I continued to pray for him prior to retreat and while I was on retreat without any heat. I feel like I was open to the possibility of visiting him, but I could never get to the point of having any idea what I would say or even what it might look like. In the end, I discerned that I was not called to visit, but to continue to pray. And I have. I wonder, though, if I missed an opportunity to simply be Christ for someone who is suffering because I was afraid. As we begin this year of mercy and this Advent season, let's consider how God is calling us not only to acts of mercy, but to be merciful. It is totally because of the mercy of God that Jesus came and that we celebrate the incarnation, God becoming flesh. And it is because of this incarnational act that we are called to continue and live out, that we are able to and called to be merciful. I would like to close with a song that speaks to me of Christ in the world. At the end of the song, several questions will appear on the screen.
God breaking through to our eyes, but this is no great surprise. Babies in barns, green fields of farms, this is the body of God. A star in the dark sky we share, straw underfoot as we look up and stare. Each part of creation, a perfect formation that lives as the body of God. Where else would God be but right here? In, within, through, all we sense and we feel. God in the manger, God in the cows, God in the innkeeper's mother's eyebrows. Sure was a marvelous night, the story of birth and new life, and the dreams and the fears of the new parents' prayers were felt in the body of God. Just one more beautiful way, God's body blooms its array. Our Christmas story, one image of glory as we move in the body of God. Where else would God be but right here? transcendent and cosmic and at home in our tears. God in the common, God in the strange, God in Jesus' very first diaper change. Well, these are unsettling times, and as I put my son down for the night, I can't help to dream how much kinder we'd be if we knew all of life, the world's every plight, to be part of the body of God. Well, where else would God be but right here, under our noses and in the midst of our fears? God in our stories, God in the world, God in the pain and the good news we've heard. Oh, God in the manger, God in the cows, God in the common, God in the strange, God in our stories, God in the world, God in the pain and the good news we've heard. Oh,
Please take some time to reflect on the questions. So, when have you suffered and experienced mercy? Where, how, and for whom are you being called out of your box this Advent season? How are you being called to be Christ amidst the chaos? And who at your holiday table is suffering? I think we forget about these folks. How are you called to ease their suffering? And these are only suggestions. So.
Thank you so much for this time here. You could tell by the feeling in the room there were some very deep discussions going on. Please join me in Amy's words were not only very helpful but very personal. She, for all her reluctance to jump into this topic, she jumped into it at a personal way that made it easy for us to share. So let's thank her very much. Maureen's going to carry a mic around, and it would be really great if there's a personal story or something that really jumped out of anybody in response to what Amy opened up that we can share with the group. Just raise your hand and we'll get a mic to you.
Amy's reflection and the questions helped me remember that when I was working on my degree in counseling here at Creighton, I was also going through chemotherapy at my last semester. And so I was quite sick, but I was still carrying on. And 3 faculty people made accommodations for me so that I could finish my degree and I could walk in graduation. And I will never forget their mercy.
At our table, we were talking about, I don't know if everyone saw the article in the paper of the gentleman who passed away on Friday after Thanksgiving. He was found at 72nd and Blondo. And we just talked about that woman telling the story about, how forthcoming she was, how terrible she felt that, that he had passed away. And I mean, I think that's pretty brave for her to say that I wished, I could have done more, and then to have it in the newspaper like that. And so we were just talking about that, about how brave she was, and I'm sure she's having a hard time forgiving herself for letting that happen.
I am a graduate student in the Master's in Ministry program, as well as I work in campus ministry. And part of my program is dealing with a lot of really heady theology stuff, is understanding who Christ is or who God is and defining that for myself and in order that I can use that in my ministry. And I love it. I love that I get to study that, but I think it sometimes makes entering into that on a faith level or in a relational way difficult. And mercy is something, especially as we prepare to enter into this year, that I've been thinking about, well, what does this mean theologically? How do we define mercy in our faith? What does this actually mean? And as I was wrestling with that, I remembered back to a retreat experience where I was bringing some inadequacy or some fear to God and entering into that in prayer. And thanks to some really great spiritual directors, the invitation was always there to, well, tell God what you want God to know. Like, imagine yourself in a space where you're sitting down with God and telling God, and what does God say back to you? And it's always this mercy that I experience from God in that prayer that reminds me, oh yeah, this is what mercy feels like, because I've brought that to God, and God always and continually says, well, I love you anyways, or I'm here for you, or whatever that is. So as I enter into this theologically initially, because of where I am in my master's program, I have to remind myself of what that mercy feels like, because I felt it.
We had several very moving conversations here. Thank you, Amy. However, I think one thing they boil down to is the need for mercy, the need to really be attentive to the person and the needs of the person rather than a class of people or something. Because the stories that we shared, either of trying to extend mercy to others or in receipt of it ourselves, were situations where people or we tried to really focus on that one person in front of us that has the issue and allow them to experience the grace, and if we're really blessed, help them see how to pull that out of themselves, knowing that it's there.
A question was posed to us as a Christian life community too, to reflect on how do we see ourselves with this year of mercy? How do we want to be merciful? And the idea of being merciful or being Jesus' face in mercy had never occurred to me, and I'm pretty old. But I think if I can remember that for me, mercy is the same thing that we say here at Creighton as compassionate care. It's just another way of expressing it. And if we can think of that, if I can think of that, then it's easier for me to put a handle on how people are compassionately caring for me or how I am compassionately caring for others.
I hope it's okay to share a thought that came to me after the discussion here, but it just came into to my mind. It was obvious from the start of his public life that Francis's every action expressed mercy. But then when he scolded, like taking after the Curia people, giving them a really a stark examination of conscience, I said, well, wait a minute, that doesn't sound very merciful to me, that kind of scolding. But then as I've followed him, and I happen to be reading my way and praying my way through the Joy of the Gospel once again, which is a wonderful rediscovery of something that came out a couple of years ago now. There's some great scolding passages in that as well. But then I realized as I was reading it, it's all in the service of mercy. In other words, what he scolds is behavior that gets in the way of the church's ministry of mercy. So at the bottom line for him really is the mercy of God, even in his scolding. And so the takeaway for me was, well, if I'm tempted to scold or criticize, I should ask myself, now is this scold in the service of mercy?
Thank you, Dennis. For all of us who are parents or grandparents, we're giving scolding a new meaning, new context.
Thank you so much. This is really a great thing to work at a place where you can pause to do this to help us enter Advent at another level. At each table, we provided a copy of Pope Francis's letter, which describes the Year of Mercy and gives it its shape in some extraordinary language. We invite you to take an opportunity to read that and enjoy it throughout this Year of Mercy. It goes from December 8th, the Feast of the Immaculate Conception, all the way through to next November, the Feast of Christ the King. And there will be things that happen along the way. First of all, on December 8th in Rome, he will open the door of the Jubilee Year of Mercy, and we will walk through that threshold together as a community. And symbolically, that kind of experience will happen at our cathedral on the third Sunday, the evening of the third Sunday of Advent, the 13th. But here at St. John's on that same day, so December 8th, Wednesday at the noon Mass, we're going to have an experience of that celebration by beginning where? No, it's at the cathedral. We begin somewhere. At the cathedral, they're going to begin at the school and process to the cathedral. Here we're just going to have it at the noon Mass on December 8th. I'm sorry. Yeah, we might walk out and in or something like that. Simple. Let's close with a simple prayer. Send your Spirit and consecrate every one of us with its anointing, so that the Jubilee of Mercy may be a year of grace from the Lord, and your church, with renewed enthusiasm, may bring good news to the poor, proclaim liberty to captives and the oppressed, and restore sight to the blind. We ask this of you, Lord Jesus, through the intercession of Mary, Mother of Mercy, who live and reign with the Father and the Holy Spirit forever and ever. Thank you.